Hello, my name's Vicky Washay, and in this podcast, I'm going to be talking to you, I suppose, almost in a sense of pre-making your New Year goals. But I don't want that to turn you off. I want you to be drip-fed in some thoughts that will stir your mind and get you asking the right sort of questions so that you can be doing the right sort of thinking. And I wanted this to happen right after the podcasts that have come from South Africa, because I think there's a vein there of what does it mean to live the life that we live here in the West? What is your life mean to you? What's its purpose? What's its joy for you? What are you grateful for? What could you do more of? What could you do less of? And how can you create, because we are so privileged here, a life that gives you the minimum stress and the maximum joy? And then from that place, you can maybe start thinking about how you can help others through whatever means that is. I mentioned last week that I'd spent the morning going to Croydon. So drove about 2 hours there, spent about 2 hours there, giving a talk to a group of women that were looking to set up their own businesses, and then drove 2 hours back. And that 6 hours is not paid for work. It's something that I enjoy doing because I've gone down and I've spoken to that group quite a lot over the last almost 8 years. But I can do that because I'm in a position where I'm happy with the life that I have plenty of what I want, and I have very little of what I don't want. And I want to start off with this little metaphor again, if you like. What are you missing out on because you don't know what to look for? That's the point that we're going to get to. And what might be right in front of your eyes, but you can't see it because you don't know that it's a thing, or you don't even know that it's a thing that you want. So when we were traveling in South Africa, it was very much because it was the desert flower season. And there are just 2 weeks of the year that the desert flowers bloom. Now, I'm sure that I've seen some David Attenborough nature style program that's talked about the desert and the incredible creatures that live in deserts with basically no water around them, you know, little mice, even the insects, the snakes, all of that type of stuff. And also I've seen programs where after a fire, then there are these flowers that bloom, all of that type of stuff. But I just didn't think of South Africa and desert going together. But there is a place called the Karoo Desert in South Africa, and it's not far from Cape Town. So actually it should have been on my thoughts. But you know, sometimes you have all these disparate pieces of knowledge, but they're not necessarily all coming together in a cohesive place. So we've gone out and we're exploring, and we're doing lots of walks and visits to places where we might see these desert flowers. And one of the walks we did, we were off at some caves, and then we went for a walk out into the wild, and we're out among the bush, and you can see all of these large protea bushes. And the protea is that massive, almost, I won't say it's daisy-like, but that massive South African flower, not the spiky orange one, but the big-headed, often pink, sometimes purple, maybe white, maybe orange protea flowers. And it's the national flower of South Africa. And there were all of these bushes, and they'd gone over, they've done their bloom, and they've not ready to start again yet. So we're wandering around through all these dead bushes, and we're looking at things. We can hear the water, and it's lovely, and there's no wild animals to get us, and we're taking in the mountains, and everything is wonderful. But what we didn't know was that there was a beautiful little orange flower there, and we didn't know about it, so we didn't know to look for it. So we've not got our eyes focused on the area where these little flowers would be. And it was only just as we were turning round, this flash of colour amongst all the sort of grey, brown, sandy colours that were out there, a very muted palette that we were walking through. This little bit of orange just struck us as like, oh, what's that? Is it a piece of rubbish that was maybe thrown on the floor, you know, a piece of plastic, or maybe a drinks bottle or a drinks tin? And when we then looked and focused in on where this flash of colour had been, there was this beautiful, delicate little orange flower. Once we noticed it, We've been out for a half-hour walk. It was everywhere on our half-hour back. It was here, it was there, and I'll put some pictures in the show notes so that you can see it. This flower was everywhere. But we'd missed it because we didn't know to look for it. And we didn't know to look for it because we didn't know to ask the question, what colourful little flowers are out there? We just didn't have the knowledge levels, the skill levels to ask the right questions. Now, here's the link. When I started in property, or let's say before I started in property, I was aware of potentially an opportunity, but I could not articulate it in a way that I could work out how to seize that opportunity. So if I start right from the beginning, when my grandparents passed over, we moved into their house. It was a large 5-bed house with quite a lot of land. And I didn't know, because I didn't have the words, that actually this was an opportunity where we could split title and develop 3 plots on the land, as well as keeping the main house, which we could turn into a multi-let. I did not have the words multi-let, HMO, split title. Yes, I knew there was a word called development, and there was even a word called house development or house building, but I didn't have them in such a way that I could articulate them as concepts, so that I could sit there and go to my father, for example, or my mother, and say, gosh, what we could be doing with this land, have you thought we could get planning permission and we could split title on the main house and create, 3, 4 effectively parcels of land, the main house and 3 other parcels of land. And then what we could do is we could get planning permission, and then we could sell those plots with planning permission. And actually we could then choose to stay in the big house if we wanted to, or we could sell all 4 plots and actually take that money and go do something else. And because I didn't have that language, and my father and my mother didn't have that language, that isn't what we did. We just sold the whole house because it was too big for us. It wasn't where we wanted to live. And then when we sold the whole big house, the person who bought it came along and broke it up into the 4 parcels and sold them off and got those 4 parcels developed. And we didn't know because we didn't know. And we didn't ask because we couldn't, because we didn't have the language. And then when I think about the next property, then we moved on, and briefly my parents rented a property before they found something they moved into. And I moved into rented accommodation at one point, and I didn't really have the language of landlord, tenant, AST, assured short-hold tenancy. That was the contract between us. I didn't have any idea how the landlord had managed to go to someone to say, I've got this property, does somebody else want to live in it? But I also, because I didn't have the language, couldn't form the questions to dig in and to understand about this situation that was going on around me. And as I started to become aware of the language, I started to become aware of the opportunities. And as I started to become aware of the opportunities, I started to ask better questions. And as I asked the better questions, I gained more understanding. And so if you take, for example, property, do you understand the words amortizing your debt? Do you understand what a buy-to-let mortgage is? Do you understand the term of a mortgage? Do you understand the implications of assured short-hold tenancy, or the difference between buy-to-let and HMO? If you're thinking about investing in stocks and shares, and now I don't have the language for this, but do you understand the difference between trading and having shares? Do you understand the difference between day trading and other trading? Do you have that language so that you can understand enough that you can ask the first question? And then as you gain knowledge from that first answer, you improve your knowledge bank, you improve and increase your language bank, and then you ask a better second question. And as you get the second answer, you improve your knowledge, you increase your language bank, and then you move on and you move on. And you can apply that to how to be a parent, how to be a property investor, how to trade, how to be a good student at school, how to be a business owner, how to be a better employee. Anything that you want to even think of will have a language structure around it. And so does success. So success has a language around it. And by understanding that language, you can ask questions and from that gain better understanding. And by gaining better understanding, ask better questions and gain even better understanding. And last week, I set you the challenge, if I like, to start thinking about 2023 and how has it been for you? And what have you loved? What do you want more of? What do you want less of? And now if you combine that with the story of the little orange flower, what are you missing that's right in front of you because you don't have the language so that you can ask for more of what you want? So maybe what you have about 2023 and how it's been for you is a feeling. It could be a thought that's a bit amorphous and you're struggling to put it into words. It could be a desire that you can't articulate. And all I'm suggesting now with the metaphor of the little orange flower is think of the thought, the feeling, the desire as the little orange flower. And you can't describe it and you can't ask the question, where is it? Because you didn't know it existed. And you can't really describe it because you've never seen it before, so you don't have the right language. But maybe you could, and I don't mean this literally, Google it, but you could Google it, you could explore, you could see what you can find out about your feeling. How can you make your feeling a bit more tangible? What word most closely relates how you feel or what you think or what you desire? And it might not be a perfect fit, but what if you then looked that word up very simply, whether you use a thesaurus or whether you use Google, whatever you might do, and see, can you shape that word into a better feeling? So for years and years and years, I remember really struggling to understand what it was I wanted from my father. I had this feeling that I always wanted something from my dad. And I actually did it as a writing exercise. My coach at the time got me to write, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and I took a notepad and I literally spent, I think, 3 hours writing everything I possibly could about what I did know and what I did have the language to describe about what I wanted from my father. And I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I wrote about, what do I have from my father? What didn't I get from my father? What do I want more of from my father? What do I want less of from my father? How does my father see me? How do I see my father? All of that sort of stuff, just writing and writing and writing. And then the exercise made me go back and look at the language that I had and start to circle words that had some sort of meaning to me. They had some sort of feeling attached to them. And I'd circle these words. And when I went through that exercise and I circled all the words, I then took the words out and I wrote them down in a list. And as I wrote them down in a list, there started to be a pattern. Some of the words kept coming up again and again and again. Some of the words only appeared once, but they had a connection with maybe another word. And then I started to group them. And I just played with this language, these words that had evolved or emerged out of my thoughts. And eventually what I came to was, and this never appeared in any of my writing, but I wanted my father's approval. I wanted my father to think that I was clever, that I was capable, that I was successful, maybe. I've added that one on afterwards because it's been a good year since I've done that exercise, but very specifically what I wanted is approval. And I then understood, where did that come from? It came from his Italian education was very different to my English education. And when he came home and he asked me questions about school and he questioned me, and I didn't have the knowledge to answer his questions, mainly because I hadn't been taught it. And again, I didn't have the language to go away and find the answers because I didn't know that I didn't know it. So I couldn't learn it. But then he would ask the question and I wouldn't be able to answer it. And so then I had to go away and find the answers for it and then report back to him. But in doing that, I started to stoke up a little bit of, maybe I'm not clever or not clever enough, or my father doesn't think I'm clever. So then you start to apply these thoughts in all the wrong places, and you make up things, quite frankly. We all make up things. We make up things about our lives. We make up things about how people think about us, which probably none of it is true at all. And once I got this level of understanding, I didn't bother to speak to my dad about it, because it was almost as if something popped inside me. I had this new piece of language. I had the new understanding that went with it. And I was able to rethink everything that I was doing. And if you think back to last week's podcast, I was trying so hard to get my father's approval in order to get him to think that I was clever, because I had decided that he didn't think I was clever, which is not true at all. And years later, he said to me, completely out of the blue, I think it was when I'd written the very first book I wrote back in 2010. He said to me, I sat down and I read your book cover to cover. It's taken me all day. And I want you to know how proud I am of you. And it still triggers me. And I think that he'd never specifically used that language, but maybe in his world rather, he had never had anybody say that they were proud of him. Maybe he didn't have the word proud. Maybe he didn't know that the word proud would mean something to me. Or maybe I'd never specifically done anything when he felt that was the word that was necessary to use. The point being, how can you make plans about a future that you want when we are laden with feelings that we can't describe, thoughts that we can't articulate, desires that we can't articulate, and yet you know that you want something, but you can't ask for it because you don't have the language to say it, or you can't plan for it because you don't have the language to write it in your goal. And so, building on last week, think about 2023. What is it that you loved? What is it that you want more of? What is it that you want less of? And if you don't have a word to describe the answers to those questions, is there a feeling that you really loved something about this year, but you can't work out what it is? Is there a thought that you can't describe that is about what you would maybe like more of or less of? Is there a desire that you can't articulate, but you know that you really want something? And if you feel like that, do a writing exercise. And it is important that it's a writing exercise, and it's important that it's with a pen and a piece of paper. And you can do it in a book, or you can do scraps of paper. It doesn't really matter, because at the end of it, you're going to tear it up and throw away, because that's not what's important. And start writing. Give yourself permission to have an evening off, just on your own. Go to a room by yourself. Listen to music if you do need to listen to music, or sit quietly if you can, and ask yourself a question. How do I feel about 2023? How do I feel about 2024? How do I feel about what I love, what I want more of, what I want less of? How do I think? What do I think I want more of and I want less of? And just play with the questions that work for you, to probe in where you know that you've got this, I won't say there's a black hole, because that implies that there's nothing in there, but this foggy place. And you need to blow away the fog so that you can see it, so that you can then describe it, so that you can then learn about it, so that you can get better language, so you can ask better questions. And then you can actually say, right, I know what it is. I really felt that in 2023, it was like this for me. It was stressful. It was hard work. It was lovely. It was enjoyable. I felt energized, whatever it is. And I really want 2024 to have more or less of that. And therefore, because I now have the language to describe it, I can then ask myself the next question. If I loved it, How can I replicate this? If I didn't love it, how can I change that so that I have something else in its place? What would be the opposite of the thing that I didn't love? What could I actually focus on as my goal, as my desire for the coming year? Maybe what you want to do is listen to some of the earlier podcasts again. Maybe think about whether you're stuck in a role that's been given to you. Maybe you're putting up with life. Maybe you feel like you're on a merry-go-round, and rather than deciding on your own life, on your own wealthy life, maybe you're feeling bound by guilty or responsibility. And have a think about it. Play with this. Actually think about, what is it that you want in your life? And if you can't come up with those words, could the writing exercise, just write it, ask yourself all sorts of questions about it. We could do it very rigidly, or you could just use it as a writing exercise. And when you have written sufficiently, ask yourself, what else do I need to write about this in order to gain clarity? And when you fully finish, because you've asked yourself that question maybe 2 or 3 times, now put your paper down, get yourself a cup of tea, come back and start to circle words that have meaning to you. And out of those words, what are you learning? What are you recognizing? I'm going to talk to you about ostriches, I think, next week. I think what I'll do is I'll tell you the ostrich story. I think it fits in here nicely. Meanwhile, what is it that you want 2024 to be like? We're coming from a place of gratitude. We're coming from a place of recognizing how privileged we are. And even though we have all of that behind us, we could still be missing out on those little orange flowers because we didn't know that they were there. We didn't know that we could see them. We didn't know that we could find them. We didn't know that we could have them. We didn't know that we could take them forward in our lives with us. I wish you every success in this. This writing exercise is such a powerful way to expand your potential, your life, your future, rather than being caged in with what we were told by school, what we've been maybe told by our parents. This is where you can grow your own language so you can ask those better questions, so that you can notice more and more opportunities, so that you can choose which ones you want to follow. Not get into the, it's all hard and I have to be working harder and I have to do more. Not that. But which of these opportunities do I want to cherry pick? And I can do that because I understand them and I have the language to ask questions about them. So I can have the language to make choices about them, and I can create the life that I want to live, not the life that you want to live, not the life that your neighbor lives. It doesn't really matter what anybody else is doing. What life do you want to live? How do you want 2024 to be better for you? Even more better, not English, I know that, even more better than 2023. You need words to be able to describe that, because when you have those words, you can be in a position where you can write your goals to a better place. I'm going to leave you with that thought. I know I played this last week and I am going to keep playing it just for a little while longer. I'd like to hand you over to Julia, who you remember is the doctor from South Africa that runs the Umduduzi Children's Palliative Care charity. And I'm going to leave her with you, asking whether you can contribute and support her. I'm going to put the notes in the show notes, the links to how you can help her out. And the reason I'm going to do this is because we have so much, and we need to recognize we have so much. We need to recognize that others don't have as much as we do. They don't have the opportunities. They don't have the money. They don't have the time. They maybe don't even have the houses and the electricity that we do. They don't have the healthcare that we do. But when you come from a place of gratitude and a knowledge of how privileged you are living where you live, and that in some way this is of your making, you can then afford to help others. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Vicky Wooshea, and I hope that I have left you with a little bit more whoosh in your life and the thought of a little orange flower that you might be missing out on. But now you know that the orange flowers exist. you can go and find them for yourself. Thank you very much. Till next week.
I am Dr. Julia Ambler, co-founder of Umduduzi Hospice Care for Children. And I'm here today to ask you for help. Our job is incredibly important. We have a very small team of dedicated professionals providing another layer of support to children that have got serious illness and to their families and siblings. Palliative care for children is a very poorly understood field. A lot of people think it's only about death and dying. They don't realize how stressful an illness is for a family and a child that are experiencing it. So at Umduduzi, we receive referrals from the whole province of KZN. We see children from 0 to 18 with conditions such as cancer, liver problems, kidney failure, heart problems. These families are diagnosed, are given very serious diagnosis. They've got to cope with that emotionally. They've got to process it. They've got to understand the treatments, the implications of those treatments, the prognosis. There's also much time that a child spends away from school, spends away from home, being admitted into a strange and unfamiliar place. And then, of course, there's the spiritual side of illness. Very few of us can separate our mind, body, and spirit when it comes to something as serious as sickness, such as cancer. So our role at Umduduzi is to really focus on that, find out what are the issues that this particular family and child are facing over and above the simple diagnosis that they have received. How do we provide that extra support that they need? It may be as simple as providing them a pram, an umbrella stroller. Perhaps the child has got a neurological disability and transporting the child is so very, very difficult. That pram costs 1,000 Rand and is completely out of reach for them. But maybe we can relieve some of their suffering by providing them with this mode of transport that can easily be put into the taxi as they make their way to hospital for their numerous appointments. That help that we might give might be more about pain management. Very few doctors focus on what a child is experiencing. They manage the disease, they treat the pneumonia, they treat the cancer, but have they asked about what the pain is? Where is the pain? And how can we alleviate that pain physically, emotionally, and spiritually? So palliative care is really essential in any kind of healthcare setting. Unfortunately, in South Africa, it is purely in the NGO sector. There are very few people that are paid to do palliative care. And at the moment in South Africa, I am the only doctor receiving any funding from the Department of Health for palliative care. And I receive 10 hours a week to provide these services to the children of KZN. So we're in a difficult situation. We've got 4 part-time nurses, a social worker, another very, very part-time doctor, a translator, and now recently we've employed a manager to help us with some of the fundraising because it is just such an arduous task. So despite being a small team, all of these people are professional and need to be paid. And the families that we support really do need that extra layer of support that we are offering. So I'm asking you today, it doesn't matter how little or how much, if you've got something to be able to give, whether it is in the form of a donation, such as a pram, or giving of your hard-earned money to pay for an hour of a nurse's time, we need you. And we really would be very grateful if you would consider following us on our social media pages, joining up to, we've got 100 Club where if everyone just gave 100 Rand a month, we would be able to cover all our costs quite simply. So please think about supporting us as we support the children with serious illness based in KZN.